Okay, hello and a very warm welcome from my side to this CDR Swiss webinar on the CDR certification and the voluntary carbon market. My name is Samuel Eberenz and I'm your host for today. And I will lead you through the webinar and also introduce the Swiss carbon removal platform as well as the topic in the beginning. So before we start, please note that this webinar is recorded, but only for this first part. For the discussion at the end, we will stop the recording so everyone can speak up more freely and unobserved. In the first part, we'll have 4 speakers who I will introduce in a second. So we'll have quite a tight schedule to move to the next 1 hour and 15 minutes together. So we'll have 10-minute inputs by each speaker, and I'll ask you to put questions, especially understanding questions, into the chat in this first block. I will try to pick them up and see that we'll have some time to discuss or answer the most pressing questions of those. And then the more discussion and wider scope question or comments we'll have a chance to discuss at the end. However, there's probably not time to answer all questions and discuss everything that comes up with this wide and rich topic, because we try to really not take up too much of anyone's time, but rather stay focused and have some precise input. So I hope this works out for everyone. If you have more questions afterwards, you're very welcome to get in touch with me. I can put you in contact with the speakers if you don't find their contact online, or contact them directly. Before I introduce the speakers, I want to quickly introduce our platform. For those who don't know it, the Swiss carbon removal platform was initiated by the nonprofit organization Risiko-Dialog Foundation that I'm also working for 2 years ago. And our mission is to support the scaling up of CDR in a sustainable and in a participatory manner towards net zero and also beyond. For this, we provide a platform and a network for stakeholders in the field from across stakeholder groups, civil society, business, science, and also administration. And we foster administration and synergies between members, and also involve society and provide information for science-based public debate and decision-making under uncertainty. At the moment, we've got 59 members, and if you're interested to join, please get in touch or visit our website. Now we'll have a quick introduction to the topic. Here are the important notices for today again. And let's talk about the topic. I want to highlight 2 things. One is the Swiss scope of this. As most of you are probably well aware of, the Swiss Climate and Innovation Act was accepted by public vote last weekend. And this is, of course, amazing news for Swiss climate mitigation efforts in general, and it also has some implication for carbon dioxide removal. However, we also have to be aware this is really a policy framework for domestic net zero greenhouse gases by 2050 and doesn't specify all the details how we get there. I just want to highlight a few relevant points from the Swiss Climate and Innovation Act that open up debate, but also relevant for carbon dioxide removal. So the first point that should be noted is that, of course, reduction plays a huge role in this law, reduction for domestic emissions. And there's this one statement saying that these reductions must be technically possible and economically bearable. What that means is still to be specified beyond that act, which means that we don't really know yet from this, or this law doesn't prescribe what really the residual emissions are that we would need to neutralize with CDR by 2050. The second part, which is of course the key part for CDR, is that the residual domestic hard-to-abate emissions are to be fully offset by 2050 with CDR projects that can happen in Switzerland and abroad. And this is of course a huge incentive for CDR, or can be an incentive for incentives, so to say. And 2 specific points I want to highlight is that there's a 2040 net zero target for federal administration and cantons, which puts more pressure on them, of course, also to realize CDR in one way or the other. And companies are also obliged by this law now to achieve net zero by 2050 for their scope 1 emissions, so those directly in their operational activities, and they will also be supported with subsidies. And this is, of course, potentially a huge factor that's of investment that we can maybe leverage for carbon dioxide removals in Switzerland, but also abroad. The second thing I want to highlight is that we've seen lately something maybe like a hockey stick diagram for commitments to buy CDR, as seen on the website of CDR FYI, that I think also Stephanie will show us later. And at the same time, and of course connected to this, we have the Vera scandal earlier this year, and a lot of discussion of removals or the potential of removals to restore the trust in voluntary carbon markets. And for this, of course, certification plays a huge role. I also quickly want to highlight that what we see on CDR FYI is that there's this hockey stick in sales, as they call it, but only 2.1% of these sales have been delivered at this moment. I'm not going to talk about the price indice on the bottom right. This is something we can discuss at another point. And with this quick teaser that, of course, doesn't answer any questions, but hopefully injects a lot of new questions into all of you, I want to present our speakers of today. So in order of appearance, we have Nikolaus Wohlgemuth, who is head of supply and carbon market expert at Carbonfuture, based in Freiburg in Germany. Malte Winkler from Perspectives Climate Research. He's a research consultant and project manager and involved in many research and consulting projects related to CDR markets and especially policies. Laura Camarut from South Pole, senior specialist and for action platforms at South Pole and project manager for the CCS Plus initiative that we'll also hear about. And last but not least, Stephanie Bischof, who is managing director at Airfix, based in Switzerland. And with this, I'll hand over to Nikolaus.
Thank you very much, Samuel. So I will now share my screen with my presentation. Yeah, welcome everyone, and thank you very much to the Swiss Carbon Removal platform for giving me the opportunity to present here our view on the growth pathway towards 2050 of the CDR industry. So I'm from Carbonfuture. Carbonfuture is a company with headquarters in Freiburg, and recently now we also have an office in Zurich, and we have 5 employees in the US. We're a team of 32. And what we are doing is that we actually track and trade carbon removal. Just taking reference to the slide of Samuel shared about CDR.FYI, you have seen that there was an issuance of 90,000 tons of CO2 in carbon removal in total, and Carbonfuture has actually issued approximately half of that amount. So we are in this, in this playground, quite a significant player already, which makes us very proud. Today, I would like to talk to you or to explain to you how we see the growth of the CDR market and what the relevant measures are which are needed to grow this market. So to take one step back, we'll not spend a lot of time on that, but why is it needed to grow CDR? I think we're all on the same page here. We have this target or emission reduction pathway here, where we need to come to net zero in 2050. We will have residual emissions, and of course, to balance these emissions, we need to invest into carbon removal activities. Today, we have around 100,000 tons, 90,000 tons it was shown before, of carbon removal, which has already been enabled, and we need to actually come to 10 billion tons of removal in the 2050. So if we want to, if we see these residual emissions as projected. This means that we have a very, very steep growth path and TikTok level growth rates for the next 27 years, which are required to achieve that. Now, what can be done to actually push a market into that direction? What are instruments which can enable such an achievement? So there we see, I think, 2 types of measures. We, on the one hand, have market instruments, and on the other hand, we have policy instruments. And I will now give a little bit of a high-level overview on these instruments. So on the policy side measures, we have, on the one hand, demand and control instruments. Under these, I would count, for instance, national level reduction obligations like carbon taxes, for instance, the one in South Africa, or also the international agreement, the Paris Agreement, where each country has a nationally determined contribution, NDC, where each country commits to a certain reduction of the emissions. Then we have, under the policy measures, also market instruments. which are binding. So it's a compliance market. There we have as examples, for instance, the EU ETS, EU emission trading scheme, which is also adopted by Switzerland, but we also have instruments like the Swiss CO2 levy and the levy on the fuel imports, and click projects which are implemented in Switzerland. And on an international level, we have here the Paris Agreement with Article 6.2 and 6.4, about which Malte will, I think, report in his presentation later on. And then in parallel to these compliance or policy measures, we have the voluntary carbon market, which is currently, I would say, for carbon removal, the only instrument which is kind of working, because on the compliance side, there are not any binding schemes for carbon removals. Now we have in the EU the discussion of this carbon removal certification framework, CRCF, which is kind of a hybrid between a voluntary and compliance market. So in the current draft, it is mentioned that this certification framework will start as a voluntary market, but then later on, it's likely that this will actually then lead to binding targets and compliance. Now I will focus on the voluntary market with my presentation, and we have here now organizations which need to deliver on their promises towards net zero. And just very quickly, I know many of you know this already, but just we'll also give the background here about the difference of carbon credits. So if you want to now achieve net zero, then you have in principle a pathway which is not really possible, and this is the avoidance credit. So with emissions avoidance, we cannot achieve net zero, because if we avoid emissions and issue a carbon credit for that, we still will have 1 ton emitted at the party financing this emissions avoidance. If we want to get net zero, we need to actually balance the emissions which are remaining, the residual emissions, which means that we need to take out 1 ton of CO2 from the atmosphere and store it somewhere at a very safe place for a very long time. And only like this, only with such carbon credits or such measures, we can achieve the net zero goal. So the principle is do your best and remove the rest. Now, if we want to scale this voluntary market as a starting point, we are facing certain bottlenecks, and just want to explain these bottlenecks in the current project cycle. And this project cycle actually is very similar, be it now under the voluntary standards like gold standard, verified carbon standard, VCS, or also under the ISO norm, or also the BAFO system in Switzerland is very similar. So here you follow a procedure of writing project design document, having then third-party audits. And after these third-party audits called validation, you will issue carbon credits after you achieved a certain monitoring period. And the problem with that is that on the one hand, the standards are bureaucratic and working fairly slow. And the other problem is that you always wait for a certain time and you don't have a continuous issuance of carbon credits, which delays the carbon finance coming in from the project start to the issuance for at least 1 year, often more than that. And this, of course, is for a fast scaling market a big hindrance. Now, if you want to scale this market and make this growing faster, we actually need to streamline the communication between these actors. And we also need at the same time to avoid what also has been shown by Samuel before, that issues like this Guardian article about the voluntary carbon market and overcrediting, that this happens. So we need to strictly avoid that, because if this happens, we also cannot achieve our goals. So who does now the job? Who are the stakeholders in this ecosystem? We have maybe thousands of projects doing now monitoring and measuring of data and quantifying data of how much removal they achieved. Then we will have some reporting going on, some entities which make actually this data available to the standards. And then we have verification by handful parties verifying that data, and then the issuance of the carbon credit. So this we call a MRV framework, and such a framework actually makes the climate action trustworthy. This is not a new knowledge. This is something which is existent already, but we actually need now to make this more efficient and more trustworthy. More trustworthy, we can make it by actually implementing tracking systems which really enable a data flow from the actual removal to the carbon credit, and that this is transparent. And also we probably need to digitize it. If we now look at the responsibilities, so we have for this MRV system, the standard setting body, be it now one of the voluntary standards or also a governmental body who is setting out certain rules. The standard is actually prescribing the methodologies and also issuing the tradable carbon credit. Then we have suppliers and buyers. We have the validation verification bodies in the system, which are auditing the information which is going through the system. And ensuring trustworthiness here. And as a basis or as a foundation for all of that, we need to connect the suppliers with the buyers through a digital monitoring, reporting, verification system, which ideally records data in a most efficient way with very little manual inputs. So Internet of Things is here one of the words often used. And this information gathered, of course, needs to be audited by the verification bodies. And the verification bodies at the same time also need to learn how to audit now, not the data itself, but maybe to audit the system and need to improve here. And also the standards on their side, actually, they need to define criteria for such monitoring systems and how they actually, which quality criteria they should have and how they should work to enable this digitization. So we need to now take a step of digitization with the standards in the voluntary market, but also with the auditors to make this system being ready for the future. So here I'm ready with my conclusions. What do we need to scale the CDRs? The CDR market, so we need to actually have the standards getting into digital monitoring, reporting, and verification, and accrediting such systems, which includes that there are methodologies out there which consider this DMRV, that we have improved registration procedures, streamlined verification, which is respecting the DMRV efforts, and that we actually achieve a continuous issuance of credit, which then helps the project to have early access to carbon finance, and like this also being able to grow. Then we need to have these auditors, the VVBs, learning how to audit these MRV systems. And we have the projects liaising with such DMRV partners like Carbonfuture, like us, to actually access the carbon finance. And lastly, with this, we also think that we will get ready for compliance frameworks like the CRCF. With this, I'm already at the end of my talk. You will find my contact details then in the presentation which is shared, and I hand it back to Samuel now. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Nikolaus. I don't see any question in the chat, so I'll ask one quick question to you, Nikolaus. And so from your experience with the system as it's working now with Carbonfuture, do you see a difference if it works differently well to fund different CDR methods, like which methods to get reached by the funding with your approach and which ones don't get reached?
This is, I can answer that. So for now, Carbonfuture mainly works with measures which are going or applied in areas, like for instance, biochar or enhanced rock weathering. The reason for that is that the monitoring efforts for ensuring that we know where the CDR happened and what has been done are higher here. If you compare this, for instance, with direct air capture, where you have like one borehole where you just pump in gas, there the monitoring effort regarding the carbon storage is much less. So our exposure is from that point of view much bigger towards the biochar enhanced rock weathering projects, and also we currently see the bigger scaling potential there.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to discuss this further with everyone later on. And now we'll hand over to Malte. We'll have a little different perspective now, and I'm hoping to get answers on my question, how the Paris Agreement relates to the voluntary carbon market for carbon dioxide removal.
Yeah, thanks a lot for handing over. I'll share my screen. We will see. So as I've been introduced already, I will talk about Article 6 and the voluntary carbon markets, and how these two interact, and what this means for CDR. So the first part of my talk will be on the interconnections between Article 6 and the VCM. And then in the second part, I will just talk about a few minutes on a case study that we did with Perspectives recently on a piloting activity with Article 6.2 and a direct air capture provider. So I keep this one short. What is Article 6? I probably don't have to mention that. Nikolaus also talked about it a little bit already. We have Article 6.4, a mechanism similar to the Kyoto Protocol era's CDM, with international rules that have international oversight by a supervisory body. And then we have Article 6.2, where 2 or more countries cooperate on the basis of bilateral agreements. For the Article 6.4 mechanism with the supervisory body, there's a relatively detailed set of rules out there already. The operationalization of that is still ongoing. For Article 6.2, there's guidance and some reporting requirements. So this international oversight is not given for Article 6.2, but they share common principles, especially high environmental integrity regarding, for example, additionality, baseline setting, and also NEC ambition. And they aim for transparency and the avoidance of double counting. Why is this now important for CDR? And I think this fits in nicely with what we just heard from Nikolaus. We have seen in the last years that there has been quite massive price increases in several carbon markets. Domestic ones and also international ones are now taking up, especially in the voluntary carbon markets. We saw also a graph showing that these prices are volatile and that scandals can really shatter what is happening in the international sphere. But considering what is expected to be done in the next years to reach net zero or even become net negative globally, more or less, that's very likely that these carbon markets will play a big role, and there will be a huge demand for credits. And now that in the Paris Agreement, it is clearly formulated that CDR is also mitigation, because mitigation is both emission reductions and removals. It is to be expected that with NDCs being ratcheted up, that CDR projects become more and more important under Article 6. So in the medium term, it will be probably the most central and stable carbon market, and it has a global scope. That's expected to be more and more biased, and it will probably be a really important source of revenue for CDR. So how does now this Article 6 interact with voluntary carbon markets? There are several pathways, so to say, on how this Paris Agreement mechanisms can be important for voluntary carbon markets that you see down here. Now, the regular thing that typically happens is that we have an independent standard setter, for example, the VCS and the gold standard, and we have certified carbon credits. And then there's basically 2 pathways. One would be that the host country given authorization, then these carbon credits become HITMOs and are authorized for different use cases, different purposes. And the other pathway is that there is no host country authorization, and from both sides, so to say, we can derive the voluntary carbon market. So the main channel that is expected to play a role here in this context is Article 6.4 mechanisms, where the unit is the Article 6.4 emission reductions, and they can feed into voluntary carbon markets relatively easily, either through this or through that channel. But also under Article 6.2, there is the possibility to authorize the mitigation outcomes for use on international mitigation purposes, for example, the voluntary carbon market. So both Article 6.2 and 6.4 can play a role here. Important to note also that the standard setters, the independent carbon crediting programs, they also have the possibility to really get a step into the door here via methodologies. So first of all, under 6.2, the cooperation partners can agree to use a certain standard as long as it is compatible with the Article 6 rules. And also the supervisory body will approve methodologies, and it can be expected that also independent methodologies will be approved by the SB to then become usable for Article 6.4 cooperation. And Laura will talk in a minute on the CCS Plus initiative that actually develops a set of methodologies that are well suited for this. What Article 6 is especially attractive for, of course, for the VCM also is, I'll keep it short here, that I've mentioned already, there's a high standard for environmental integrity, there's transparency, and via authorization, the prevention of double counting. And this means that if the voluntary carbon credits are run, so to say, under Article 6, that this is really like a quality stamp for the companies selling these credits. And now the last few minutes, as I said already, will be on a case study where we had a look at how DAX can work in a 6.2 cooperation between Iceland and Switzerland. Actually, the partner was Climeworks. You are probably all aware of Climeworks, who run this direct air capture plant in Iceland. And the potential way is, of course, that Iceland will sell ITMOs under 6.2 to Switzerland, for example, for use under the voluntary carbon market. And there is a couple of issues that we stumbled across. First of all, we saw that on a methodology side, this is not really ready for use. There is some methodologies on CCS, but very few for DAX, and most of them, if not all, are not compatible with the Article 6 rules. So I've mentioned the CCS Plus initiative already, and there's also other initiatives like the IIMT, for example, that can be used then to, if blended, to become Article 6 compatible, so to say, and be really used then to make DAX enter this Article 6 space. And then also on the accounting side, there's some issues, mainly that currently it is not yet clear how DAX can be reported under the IPCC guidelines, the inventory. So currently the guidelines do not say anything about DAX. So this would have to be streamlined in order to really make sure that this is done in a uniform manner. The solution could be either that the participating parties, so the cooperation partners, they pilot this and just agree on a way on how to account for DAX in their inventories. And ideally, this would be paralleled with teaming up with other countries to officially request the IPCC to expand their guidelines, so that this will change in the future and that there will be an official IPCC guideline on how DAX can be accounted for. So these are some of the key issues that would need to be solved on the way to DAX, especially coming into Article 6. And with that, I already come to the last slide.
Thank you, Malte. Again, there's no question directed to you at the moment in the chat. Please watch it closely. So long, I would like to ask you, like with this channel that you mentioned that you see most prominently and your case study, if you could now, if all the legal and accounting issues were solved, like what could it look like with country A, country B, company C, and DAX provider D, so to say? Just 1 minute to have it a bit more tangible for those who are not so familiar with the international policy abbreviations.
Yeah, okay. So the one that is probably most promising was actually under 6.4, but what we did in the case study was 6.2. So this was a case where Iceland and Switzerland would agree that Iceland authorizes credits generated by the DAC provider, so by Climeworks in that case, to be given to Switzerland, so to say, that then use it to be put on the voluntary carbon market. So it's really basically putting this quality stamp on the carbon credits that are being generated by Climeworks, and then the two countries cooperating under this Article 6.2, making sure that these credits apply the quality criteria of Article 6, and it's then being used on the voluntary carbon markets. And this authorization always includes the corresponding adjustment, which ideally avoids double counting this, which is of course in voluntary carbon markets often problematic.
Thank you so much, Malte. I think this is super interesting to see the differences also between two countries cooperating to put something on the voluntary carbon market compared to two countries cooperating to have something that they can use for their own NDCs. And if there's questions on this, Malte can give you all the answers in the chat or later on in the discussion or after the webinar. And with this, I'm very happy now to switch over to Laura Camarut from South Pole.
Thanks. Thanks for the organizers for inviting me and for putting forward this important topic. So my presentation today will focus on the certification of CDR projects with a focus on tech CDR and on the role of certification as a trust building mechanism for those solutions. So I will touch on the role of the VCM in scaling up CDR projects, what role certification plays in that, and finally I will spend a few moments on the CCS Plus initiative as introduced already by Malte. Yeah, before I dive into the topic today, just a few words about South Pole. So South Pole is a leading climate solutions provider and climate action project developers, working together with companies, with governments and other organizations in their decarbonization journeys. Since its start in 2006, it grew into a sizable actor in the climate and sustainability space with I think over 1,200 experts working in 30 offices around the globe. So on to our topic today. So yeah, about technical carbon removals are an essential part in our climate toolbox, as already emphasized by the previous speakers. We need to scale carbon removals, and while today nature-based solutions provide the large majority of carbon removals, we also need technical solutions to develop in order to reach the scale that we need to reach net zero. And you probably heard that before, but I think it's still worth emphasizing that carbon removals are by no means an excuse to delay emission reductions, or no way to supplement this. Rapid and deep emission reductions are critical in achieving our climate goals, but scaling up carbon removals are still necessary. Three key roles for carbon removals, as emphasized by the IPCC in the near term, to accelerate climate action today in towards net zero, neutralize residual emissions, and afterwards reach go to net negative and reduce the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. At South Pole, we decided to do our part to support this important climate solution. I will mention three key initiatives within South Pole. So the CCS Plus initiative, in which South Pole is involved as a secretariat co-lead, together with Perspectives as well as a carbon consultant for the initiative. The CCS Plus is a multi-stakeholder platform developing robust carbon accounting methodologies that would enable the measurement and monetization of reduced or removed CO2 through technical solutions. NextGen, so NextGen is a demand aggregator. Has recently announced the advanced purchase of around 200,000 tons of carbon removal, and has the goal to by 2025 to purchase over 1 million of certified long-term carbon removals. And yeah, I would emphasize here the certified aspect, and the fact that only removals certified by accrual approved standard included in next gen. And finally, Airfix. I won't go into a lot of details, as Stephanie here will surely be able to give you more details. But yeah, Airfix is a leading company in the biker space by supporting biogenic emitters to develop and finance carbon removal and storage projects. Diving into the role of the VCM in scaling up CDR solutions. First, I would say that while policies and government support will be without a doubt critical in developing the carbon removal sector, this won't be enough, and there needs to be a role for private sector finance to also support this sector. How companies can get engaged in it is well by taking ownership of their decarbonization journey and neutralizing the remaining CO2 emissions after everything has been done in terms of reducing emissions on their value chain. And in the case of technical CDR, I think there is also a leadership component to it, because by purchasing carbon removals, technical carbon removals today, companies can show leadership by sending a strong demand signal that there is a market for tech CDR solutions. Secondly, the voluntary carbon market can help with de-risking CDR investments, particularly in the case of projects with high costs. And over time, it can become one of the key revenue sources for removal credits as those technologies and as well as the certification approaches develop. And finally, we can also look at the VCM as a sort of a bridge towards a compliance market. So the VCM can play a role in preparing the uptake of those solutions in international crediting mechanisms, as well as in compliance markets, by acting as sort of a testing bed for innovative approaches. Why certification matters is that in the absence of common rules, definitions, or standards, it is hard to demonstrate the positive climate impact of this project. And this sort of clarity is needed both on the side of buyers that need the confidence that the carbon removals that they purchase are real, measurable, and quantifiable. And this trust is a prerequisite to building a mature market. And there is another component to it in terms of citizen buy-in, because as carbon removal solutions will need a significant amount of policy support and government financing in order to be able to sustain the sort of support, you need public acceptance of those solutions that still remain quite misunderstood. So certification, proper like MRV accounting approaches will also play a role in building this public acceptance. Two key components, I would say, on why certification matters: the trust element in the voluntary market, and then secondly, as we look forward, bridging the transition to compliance markets. In the voluntary market, the trustworthy certification is truly the backbone of a high integrity carbon market, because this sets out the criteria to what constitutes a high quality CDR credit. And to give an example, the ICROA accreditation, for example, can be used as a means to commit to best practices in terms of financing high quality CDR projects, as well as on their consequent use of credits as a carbon management tool. And on the second point, the transition to the compliance market, how a certification in VCM can help is that regulators have the chance to build on existing quality assurance approaches. There is no need to reinvent the wheel. they can already look on some initiatives in the voluntary carbon market, which also ensures continuity and predictability for project developers. And secondly, I think there is also merit in integrating some of the lessons learned in current policies in order to make sure that we don't repeat some less effective approaches, for example. And yes, finally, I will stop to just give a very brief overview of the CCS Plus initiative, as it is a leading example on how multi-stakeholder cooperation can advance the conversation on quality assurance approaches, and also just really do the work and build a comprehensive carbon accounting methodology framework for the full suite of CCS, CCU, and CDR solutions, in order to reflect the complexity of the value chain of those projects. So in a nutshell, why is the approach of the CCS Plus initiative unique is that it is probably the only initiative taking such a comprehensive approach, really looking at a full suite of CCS, CCU, and technical CDR solutions, with the aim of creating an integrating carbon accounting approach, taking a modular structure. This is being done through collaboration. There are about 50 organizations involved in the initiative, from leading industry players to innovative startups. We also have international organizations or trade associations working with the initiative in an advisory capacity, with the aim of gathering expertise in carbon markets, climate science, engineering, project development expertise, and put it all to good use to develop those methodologies. And a key feature of the initiative and of the outcomes of the initiative is that the methodologies will be developed as a public good. So once they are published, they could be used by anyone, either on the voluntary market or on compliance markets as well. The rationale, as mentioned already by previous speakers as well, there is a lack of agreed upon principles, standardization, and carbon accounting approaches. So the CCS Plus initiative took the task to develop those methodologies that would enable a more standardized approach on how to keep track of the carbon molecules origin and storage across the different use cases. And this is how it would look like the application of the methodology would look like in practice. As I mentioned already, it's a modular approach, which allows for flexibility for project developers that can pick and choose the modules depending on their project. So yeah, it works in a plug and play approach. And to conclude, I just want to say that we are now approaching an important phase in the initiative, with the launch of the public consultation of the first set of methodologies. This includes the DAC, like the direct air capture module, transport module, another storage module. So stakeholders will have the opportunity to consult those documents soon and submit their inputs in the public consultation. So keep an eye on the latest developments.
Yes, thank you, Laura. This is very insightful and spanning quite a range of topics. Maybe I'll again allow myself one quick question, because we always have these discussions of CDR replacing traditional offsets, so to say, on the markets as one possible target or way forward now from the CCS Plus initiative and South perspective. How do you see between like fossil CCS, CCU, and CDR? How will what shared or not shared future do you see for them on voluntary markets?
Mm-hmm. I think that at this stage it's hard to tell, and that probably, you know, like once we will be able to, for now, like there are no such credits on the market. So once they will be there, we will be able to see a bit how you know, the buyers respond to those solutions. I think that, you know, like they fulfill different roles. So I think that ultimately it will be up to the companies purchasing them to determine what goal they serve.
Okay, thanks. And maybe there will still be need for some regulation. But that's up for discussion, of course. So thank you to Laura and all the other first two speakers. And now I'll hand over for our last input to Stephanie Bischof from Airfix.
Thank you, Samuel, and thanks for all the insightful presentations. I will take a slightly different perspective on the voluntary market, going a bit away from the certification, going to the perspective of companies. And I think it's very important that people like me or people who are you know, in other parts than dealing with companies are sometimes putting themselves into the shoes of the companies. I am leading Airfix, as Laura said. We are a subsidiary of South Pole in biomass, carbon removal and storage. And what we do is we are really involved in the projects. So supporting the project development of biogenic emitters like biogas plants, biomass plants, and so on. Mainly involved in transport, storage, certification matters. But also our second important topic is monetization. Which brings us then also to the topic today. We finally see also a very strong value in clustering, for instance, for smaller emitters when it comes to transport and storage in terms of the conditions that emitters get. But we are now starting right into the topic. These are some resources that I can recommend to you. The presentations are shared afterwards. I think the IPCC report is really clear to all of us, sets the scene basically. Samuel, maybe to your question that you just had, the South Pole Voluntary Carbon Market Report now recommends also to go into CDRs, technical CDRs, so to diversify the portfolio. However, we are not yet talking about technical carbon removals from fossil sources. By the way, they cannot be removals, but we are not talking about those type of credits. The last source I also really enjoyed to read a report about the voluntary carbon market from the World Economic Forum, and I quote one sentence from there. It says that investing today in engineered solutions will help to reduce the green premium for solutions that will be critical to achieving corporate decarbonization strategies and limiting warming to a 1.5-degree trajectory. So this already gives one reason why overall for the market it is great when companies are already getting involved today, because this helps the solutions to ultimately improve their price structures with time. We also see that many companies are, or the number of companies that are involved in this market is increasing. So this is from CDR.FYI that Samuel was referring to at the beginning already. And you can see that the total sales on the left side is strongly increasing, especially in 2023, with a couple of very interesting deals. You probably have heard of the Microsoft or JP Morgan deal, the next-gen facility. These are all substantial deals. And then on the right side, you see that also the number of total transactions is increasing. As a finance person, I like to make a couple of calculations looking at the numbers at the bottom. You see that there are 172 buyers and 46 marketplaces. This means that there is still quite a low number of buyers for each marketplace, probably more or less 3 to 4. So we see that the consolidation has not yet happened. And on the next page, we see why it is actually so difficult for companies to to get into this, because this is, by the way, an overview from Puro a couple of months ago, which I find very impressive, because it really shows how many participants you have today on this voluntary carbon market. So you have on the buy side, you have many participants, you have on the sales side, you have on the supply side. And since not all of these institutes are so clear for corporates who want to enter the voluntary carbon market, this can be quite a challenge. Well, the challenges are not only in the market, but for companies who want to get into the voluntary carbon market, there are also challenges when they want to do the job at their desk, basically. And they have also external challenges in the sense that they have to choose what kind of technology should they actually invest into. If they want to build a portfolio, maybe these are many technologies, or maybe they just want to invest into one technology. If they have chosen the technology, then they need to understand what kind of projects are actually on the market in these technologies. So how do they choose the suppliers? And then they also need to understand how much they actually want to pay for the CDR ton that they want to buy. And today, as you know, this is highly heterogeneous on the market. But even, I think, sometimes more difficult than these external challenges can be the internal challenges. So they need to determine what is actually the target of their CDR portfolio. So how does it fit into their sustainability strategies? And the second question can be really tricky, especially if the management doesn't know yet what is CDR. So how do they convince the top management to get into this, given that it is usually connected to spending quite high figures? How much budget is available, and how do they finance the CDR purchases? And ultimately, how much risk do they take? I cannot give you all the solutions and the answer to these questions today. Unfortunately, 10 minutes is a too short time, but I can show you two options. One option is that a company builds its CDR portfolio. These are quite a low number of companies that actually can do it themselves today, because it requires to build up internally the capacity and the capabilities. The second option is that the companies join a buyer's club. This is happening more and more, that we see this on the market. I will give you two examples I will give you one example for option 1 and one for 2. The example number 1 is Microsoft. You have seen in the news that Microsoft has invested in a few projects, but lately into a very large project in Denmark, Ørsted. It is also a bikers project. And Microsoft has made a very clear commitment. They have not only made a very clear commitment, but they actually translated this into their approach that they take for CDR. So they aim for transparency, integrity, durability, and whatever else. They not only defined the approach, but then they also defined clear project criteria. So if you want to sell a project to Microsoft, it needs to comply with their criteria. And by the way, they have already a long time ago introduced an internal carbon price into their operation. And with that, they can finance the purchases that they are doing today. So they have collected a lot of money. They have built an internal fund, and this fund actually helps them to be so active on the voluntary market in the topic of CDR. Most companies are not going down that route. Or many companies today, they don't have such good capabilities in-house, and also not the capacities. So we also see that companies join Buyers Club. Laura has mentioned before the Next Gen facility. I'm not going into details, but this is basically a joint venture between South Pole and Mitsubishi. They had a couple of anchor buyers to start with. You all know these names, BCG, LGT, etc. And there, the assumptions that Microsoft built as one company was built as a buyer's club. So they also have certain criteria that they invest in. Certification, ICROA certification is a very strong criteria, and they have supported 3 projects so far, which were published with larger goals. And the convenient thing about this is that you don't have to do all of this stuff by yourself. Somebody is actually checking all the projects for you. Somebody is doing all the processes for you. Of course, it's highly administrative. And so you don't have to do this all by yourself. I want to end my short input by why you actually should get involved now as a company. And I think the first one is really that if you want to have a complete sustainability strategy, you complement your reduction efforts, which are always the #1 priority, with removals, so that you have kind of a well-rounded sustainability strategy. The second one is doing purchases in the CDR market, as you have just seen, can be quite a difficult thing. So starting with smaller purchases makes you learn about the market. And then when you need it later on for really fulfilling your net zero commitments that you have made, or your SBTi commitments, then you know exactly how this market works. But not only you know, but by starting to buy CDRs, you also secure a seat at the table, getting access to CDRs, possibly at preferential conditions, because this is also not so easy with this kind of situation where we are in a restricted supply and restricted demand situation. The next reason would be to get visibility by being a front runner in this innovative climate field. And you know a couple of companies that have gained this visibility very clearly. The Swiss Re's or the LGTs or the Microsofts of this world, they are known for their climate commitments, and they have done this partially through investing into CDRs. Finally, the reason that also the WEF report has quoted, without strategic buyers, this market will not develop. And we will stay with the high prices or with the heterogeneous price structure that we have today. And we will not have a market when we actually need it to fulfill our climate targets. With this, I thank you for being today with us on the webinar, and I look forward to the discussion that Samuel will moderate now.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. And I also want to thank all the other speakers, all 4 speakers, and everyone joining us today. We will now move over to the open discussion, and I will stop our video now so you can, and also allow everyone to unmute and show the video. And before I do this, I just quickly wanted to show everyone who is not aware of the Swiss carbon removal platform yet how to get in touch with us. Just visit our website or send us an email.